cool. How's it going, folks? Devin here again with Make Anything, and I thought it's about time for another VR sculpting video. Designing objects in virtual reality and then 3D printing them is quickly becoming one of my favorite ways to design objects. It's just so intuitive and just really fun. Now, a lot of you have been asking me to try and make some functional objects in VR. Everything I've done so far has been very sculptural. The main problem with making functional things in VR is that with the programs I'm using right now, there's no way to really put in specific dimensions, and since you're always growing and shrinking objects in VR, the sense of scale is pretty crazy. Today we are making a chess set, which I think is a good balance between something artistic and something functional, because the pieces within themselves are like little sculptures, but they of course serve the purpose of playing a game of chess. So just as a little sneak peek, here's the king, and as you can see, I was able to do some pretty complicated and interesting stuff with this piece in VR. So let me go ahead and show you how I made this piece, as well as some of the others, and well, let's jump into VR. Alright, so you can see I've got this symmetry stroke tool selected, and that allows me to use this axis and basically draw one stroke and have it copied rotationally all around. So I can create some really cool rounded shapes like that. I mean, most of the chess pieces have radial symmetry, so this is going to be a really helpful tool for this project. I'm going to start off by creating a base here. I just want to do something simple that I can use as a foundation for all my pieces. So that looks good, and I'm just going to copy it a few times. That way I have several of them out here to do all my different parts before I start adding on to them. There we go, we've got a good lineup. And now I'm going to keep using this tool and start fleshing out my first part. And I'm doing all of this without any sketching beforehand. It's all very improvised, and just I'm going to try to figure out what looks cool and go from there. I can change the color here too, just to make it stand apart. It'll be helpful during the modeling process, even if I'm printing in a single color. And I think I'm doing the queen here, so I want to give it some nice flowy, elegant, womanly curves, and it's going to be the second tallest piece, so I have to keep that in mind, just the height relative to the other pieces I'll be making. So I'm just experimenting with how I can spiral up with this symmetry tool and create different things, and I'll lower the number of repeats just so it's not so crowded at the top. So here I'm just going to have 6 points of symmetry versus like whatever I had down there, 12 or 9. And since I'm creating these strokes basically by drawing in midair, I just have to do them over and over again until I get it right. It's just a matter of having a steady hand and just a little bit of luck, I think, too. And I'm just going to keep creating these different modules and building up and adding detail to my part. As I've said in other videos, Gravity Sketch is still in its beta version, and I'm also using an older version because I didn't get the latest update just yet, which has a lot of really cool features like control points to get really fine control over the strokes I'm making. In this case, I just have to do everything by hand and get lucky. So I scaled up the base there a little bit. I'll just delete those other ones since I changed the base now, and I'll just have to copy that later on. So as you can see, I just rotate my part constantly to make sure that everything is standing straight up and looks good in that regard. And I can scale it down in VR. You can't really tell on the screen, but now it actually looks like it's the size of a chess piece, versus before it was like a 1 or 2 foot tall sculpture I was working on. And that's one of my favorite things here. I can scale it up and down and make it any size I want. And that really helps with getting those small details, but also getting a sense of how the part will actually look when it's a tiny little print. Okay, I'm happy with the base now, so I am going to copy that again and create a few different versions of it for those additional chess pieces I'll be making. And the bottom isn't flat, but I will of course be cutting that flat later on so that it's much easier to print and so that the pieces will be more stable. I will go back and do some additional work on that queen, but for now, let's move on and start the king, just to make sure that we're keeping things consistent and not getting too carried away with one part. So for the king, I am going to use a different brush, this sharper diamond tool, and I think that'll give it a more masculine look. But I'm still going to try to keep the more general flowy feel that Gravity Sketch allows me to do very easily compared to any other 3D software. So here I am, just trying out some different stuff. Like I said, it's all improvised, so I'm doing things first and then seeing if they work after. I ended up scrapping that version. It seemed just a little too much with all those tiny little strokes. I'm gonna do more of a straight line here. So yeah, as you can see, I'm doing a lot of the same strokes as the queen so that they will fit together quite well. But since I'm using that different brush, it gives it a very distinct feel at the same time. So you can definitely tell them apart. But I don't know, I think they look like a family, don't you? I'll also switch to the square brush here just to create the signature cross at the top of the king that most chess pieces have. And generally you don't want to have like a cross shape like this. It seems like it would be impossible to print out, but I'm going to turn it diagonal like this, and obviously there at the bottom of the T there will be some overhangs that will be unsupported, but since this is such a tiny piece, the printer will actually be able to pull it off pretty well, I think. Now unfortunately, I got bamboozled by Gravity Sketch again, because when I save my file, it puts a big screen over my computer and messes up my recording. So I wasn't able to record myself doing the knight, but we're just gonna jump ahead and I'll show you how I made the rook here, which is that wonderful stone tower that guards the very edge of the chess set. The rook was my favorite chess piece when I was young. I don't know if it's because of how it looked or because it was just really easy to understand how to use it. So I want this to look a little organic and have the bricks not all be perfectly symmetrical. So I will start with the radial symmetry tool, but once I start doing those outer bricks, I'm going to do them individually. So yeah, I'll create that general form, just a straight tower and kind of a larger top. And I'm just going to keep using the square, but here, as you can see, I turned off that rotational symmetry, and I'm just going to do one brick at a time, kind of wrapping short cube-shaped strokes around the tower and slowly building my way up. And you just have to be pretty patient, take it slow, consider every stroke, but don't think about it too much. I'm working on this like it's a giant piece, but I've got to remind myself that this is going to be like 1.5 inches tall or something, so all the little tiny details will probably be invisible, but they're still going to add some like natural, more organic feel to the whole piece. And then I'll go around the top of the tower, and I'm just going to drop down cubes here to make it a little more symmetrical and orderly, but still not at all, because they're being placed by hand, and as you can see, they're not perfectly lined up, and I think that works great for the feel of this set. And then I'll go up and do another ring, just offsetting it all by half a brick, the same way that a brick wall is made in real life. Kind of. Okay, I accidentally mirrored it so you can see a second tower in the back there. But I'm able to grab giant chunks because of Gravity Sketch's pretty cool select feature, and I can adjust the height of the tower there. I do have to keep in mind the height of this rook versus the height of the knight versus the height of the king and the queen, and make sure they're all scaled appropriately to one another. The overall scale is something I'm going to set after I export it from Gravity Sketch, but the relative scale I want to look good in Gravity Sketch, and that'll make everything else a lot easier. Now here to deal with this overhang on the top of the rook, I'm just going to create some kind of diagonal blocks, trying to create a 45-degree chamfer of sorts, but a lot messier. Alright, that's about it for the rook. So let's jump ahead and see some of the other parts I created. You can see the bishop here and the pawn, and is that all of them? That's all the pieces. Okay, cool. So there we have all my pieces, and as you can see, they all have their very distinct looks. They're not difficult to tell apart, but just because of the way that Gravity Sketch has me sculpting, they all do fit together quite well. And I think that's important with a chess set. I'm going to do some final adjustments, modifying the proportion here and making sure everything looks the way I want it to. The head of the bishop here is kind of off center. There we go. I'll redo that. And I'll use the mirror tool here. I have everything lined up along the mirror, and that allows me to create just, mirror symmetry. All right, yeah, I just want to round this out and make sure it looks just great. I think the bishop was the final one I had to nail down. And I accidentally had rotational symmetry on for part of this, I guess, so you can see all those little bits in the background. But that's not a big deal, since I'm going to be cleaning this up outside of Gravity Sketch. I'll be able to deal with those little buggers. Okay, everything looks good now. So we're going to export this as an OBJ file, and I'm actually going to use the Windows 3D Builder program, which comes with Windows 10, and I've never even touched it, but I decided to try it out since it's a free tool, and I actually found out it's got some helpful features for bringing something out of Gravity Sketch, which I will show you. The first thing we gotta do is cut away all these little bits that we don't need. I'll do that using this split tool, which uses a plane to cut the part, and you can have it remove anything that's on one side of the plane. So I'll just rotate that plane to cut away the little parts I don't want on either side of my chess pieces. And now I can use that same split tool, but keep what's on both ends, just to separate the individual chess pieces, because right now they're all being treated as a single object, even if they're not touching. As you can see, now that I split them, I can select just the queen, and that's what I'm going to have to do in order to export them individually. So I'll go ahead and do that with each piece, just going over one at a time and splitting one off of the group until I have them all separate. So once I have all the parts separated, I need to rotate them all so that they're level and they're gonna sit flat on the ground. As you can see, they're all kind of rotated just a little bit in every which way, and that's why I liked to use the 3D Builder here, because they have this settle tool which just drops it down onto the plane, and as you can see, if I select these two, it just falls over using realistic physics, and kind of that's how it settles the parts. And I thought it was really fun the way they animate that and show how it settles. See, I can pick it up and it'll kind of fall into place. I think it's super fun. You just have to make sure that you're only selecting that one piece. Otherwise, they're gonna fall over, which is cool too. And I think you can actually 3D model in this software too. So if you guys want me to do that, let me know and maybe I'll check it out a little more. The 3D Builder also has this cool measuring tool that I can kind of use to roughly just measure the width of the base here by just putting 2 points down, which is another very intuitive way of measuring my 3D part. So I can use that to measure and figure out the scale that Gravity Sketch exported this at, and then kind of figure out how big I want it to be. And then based on that ratio, I can go here into the scale tool and scale it up. So the parts were actually much too small right now, and I figured out that ratio of how much bigger I wanted them to be, and 31.2 ended up being the number that I wanted to scale up to. And now all the pieces are the size that I intended for them to be. The last thing to do is to save them out. But even if they are separate, you can't just save them out as one thing. If you just save it as an STL, it's gonna save all of them together. So what I'm actually gonna do is just take turns deleting all except for one part and then saving that part out. And then I can have an individual STL for each model. After I save one, I just Control Z, undo, get back the other models, delete the rest, and yeah, go through like that, saving one at a time. Now from 3D Builder, I probably could have just used that split tool again to cut the flat bottom on the base of the parts, but I am gonna come into Mesh Mixer just because it's really good at analyzing the pieces and making sure that they're gonna print flawlessly. So I'm gonna go into Mesh Mixer, bring each part in and make it solid. And then I'll go ahead and play with those features, make sure it's preserving the sharp edges and it's got a good enough accuracy so that the parts still look nice and clean. And then I'll just do my plain cut here, cut the bottom flat so that we can print it nice and easily. And that's it. Here I am printing the parts out, and just to be safe, I printed them one at a time to make sure everything was working. But all the parts came out looking just great. It was really late at this point, so I decided to try the other side, printing the entire set in one go. And I just left it right away. Bed adhesion didn't work, and I ended up with a mess of spaghetti. I mean, it wasn't a total failure. I got some of the pieces out clean, but I did have to print a lot of them over again. But in the end, everything came out just beautifully. This is a pearl white PLA from Matter Hackers, and if you look at it from the right angle, it's got like a magenta hue or a glow to it. That's really cool. And the opposing team is printed in Protopasta stainless steel PLA, which is also really cool. And apparently it can actually be polished, but I actually like the matte finish, and I love the weight that the steel gives to it. So here is the final set, all together and ready to battle. And I only made the pieces. I did not make this table. That was actually my dad's creation, so if you want to learn how to make that, you're gonna have to bug him. In the close-up, you can see some of the pawns look a lot better than other ones, and those differences are between the ones I printed one at a time versus the ones I printed in bulk. So unless you've got a really nice printer, printing parts individually will generally have them come out nicer, just because the printer head doesn't have to move around quite so much. There's less room for error. But overall, I'm really happy with how every piece came out. I think they look gorgeous. Awesome. I've got to say, these parts came out just great. I love how they look all together as a set. I love the materials that I used as well. This stainless steel filament from Protopasta and this pearlescent PLA from Matter Hackers. They both look really cool, and they're great together as well. Sculpting functional objects in VR was definitely a blast. It won't be the last time I do this by any means. So you can definitely look forward to more awesome VR sculpted 3D printing projects. But that's it for now. I'm Devin, this is Make Anything. Don't forget to stay inspired.